Welcome to my Chanel Coins History Coins VC today. Videos is one you want to miss. We're driving into the words. Top 4 Australia, so let's get it started. Of course, here's a detailed flowing 10-minute style paragraph on Elizabeth, Australia in 2014, covering its background, situation and events of that time. Elizabeth, located about 24 kilometres north of Adelaide's city centre in South Australia, has a rich and complex history that traces back to its founding in 1955. As a planned satellite city originally built to handle the post-World War II population boom, Elizabeth was envisioned as a modern industrial suburb with vast opportunities for workers, particularly those employed in manufacturing. By 2014, Elizabeth stood as a place that had undergone significant transitions, facing both the challenges and hopes typical of Australian outer metropolitan regions. In 2014, Elizabeth was best known for its strong working-class roots, multicultural diversity, and a proud but struggling industrial heritage. It was particularly impacted by the decline of Australia's manufacturing industry. One of the biggest events affecting Elizabeth at the time was the looming closure of the General Motors Holden plant in nearby Elizabeth South. Announced in late 2013, Holden, a giant of Australia's automotive industry, had been a cornerstone employer for Elizabeth residents for decades, and its closure, planned for 2017, was already sending shockwaves through the community in 2014. There was widespread concern about job losses, economic stagnation, and a broader identity crisis for a town built on the promise of manufacturing prosperity. At the social level, Elizabeth in 2014 was diverse and vibrant, but also faced significant socio-economic challenges. The population was a mix of older residents, many of whom had migrated from Britain in the 1950s and 1960s under the £10 Palm scheme, as well as a growing number of newer immigrants from places like Afghanistan, Sudan, and the Middle East. Public housing was more common in Elizabeth than in many other Adelaide suburbs, leading to certain stereotypes, but locals often fiercely defended their sense of community pride and resilience. The area had a strong community spirit fostered by local events, sporting clubs, notably in Australian rules football and soccer, and arts initiatives. The Elizabeth City Centre remained a hub of daily life, providing shopping, services, and social spaces for residents, although it too was feeling the pressures of broader economic uncertainty. Crime rates in Elizabeth were a concern during this time, with higher-than-average incidents of petty theft, domestic violence, and vandalism compared to other parts of Adelaide. However, police and community organisations worked hard to tackle the roots of these issues, focusing on youth engagement programs and mental health services. Education was another focal point, with schools such as Playford International College undergoing reforms aimed at improving opportunities for young people in the region. Meanwhile, government programs like the Northern Economic Plan were beginning to take shape, aiming to attract new industries such as health, defense, and advanced manufacturing to replace the traditional automotive-centered economy. There were signs of hope. The expansion of health services in the area, particularly with the newly developed Lyle McEwen Hospital precinct, was seen as a potential anchor for future jobs and community stability. Culturally, Elizabeth retained a strong connection to music and the arts. It's famously the hometown of Jimmy Barnes and the legendary Australian rock band Cold Chisel, and that sense of gritty, honest, working-class artistry still pulsed through the area in 2014. Local councils and organizations promoted arts festivals, youth music programs, and multicultural celebrations, attempting to bolster community pride and create a more positive narrative for the suburb. In addition, sporting success remained a key pillar of Elizabeth's identity, with the Central District Bulldogs continuing to be a strong team in the South Australian National Football League, SANFL, and soccer growing in popularity alongside traditional Australian rules football. In political terms, Elizabeth was part of the broader Playford region and often a battleground for political promises around infrastructure, jobs, and services. Politicians at both the state and federal levels paid attention to Elizabeth's struggles, knowing that voters in the area could swing elections. Discussions about how to manage the automotive transition, boost local employment, improve public housing conditions, and invest in youth services were common themes in 2014's political discourse relating to Elizabeth. Public transport, particularly the Gawler railway line which services Elizabeth, was also a significant topic, with many residents advocating for better, faster, and more reliable services to help connect the north with the Adelaide CBD and beyond. In all, Elizabeth in 2014 was a suburb standing at a crossroads, grappling with the painful decline of its traditional manufacturing backbone, but also starting to imagine a new future based on resilience, adaptation, and community strength. It was a place marked by deep pride, ongoing challenges, and a slow but determined push toward regeneration. Although many residents felt a sense of loss and uncertainty, there was also a cautious optimism that, with the right support and initiatives, Elizabeth could reinvent itself for a new generation. Would you also like me to include a little timeline of major 2014 events for Elizabeth specifically? Could make it even richer. Of course, here's a full, flowing, detailed paragraph about Elizabeth, Australia in 2015, designed to match a 10-minute read. In 2015, Elizabeth, South Australia, a suburb approximately 24 kilometers north of Adelaide's centre, found itself in a pivotal period of transition and uncertainty. Established in 1955 as a proud experiment in urban planning and industrial growth, Elizabeth had long been a symbol of South Australia's post-war optimism. However, by 2015, the suburb was grappling with deep socio-economic challenges, largely stemming from the slow decline of manufacturing in Australia. The most profound blow came with the earlier 2013 announcement that Holden, the automotive giant that had been the economic heart of Elizabeth for decades, would close its manufacturing plant in 2017. In 2015, the reality of this approaching closure loomed large over the suburb, as workers, families, and businesses faced the daunting prospect of thousands of job losses. Anxiety was widespread, not just for direct Holden employees, but for those in supporting industries and the wider Elizabeth community, whose economic and social structures had grown around the automotive industry. This sense of looming change marked everyday life in Elizabeth in 2015, coloring public discussions, political campaigning, and community initiatives. Economically, Elizabeth in 2015 was already struggling. Unemployment rates in the city of Playford, which encompasses Elizabeth, were among the highest in the state, and many residents were reliant on welfare and social services. Local businesses, particularly those linked to manufacturing supply chains, faced declining revenues and an uncertain future. The real estate market was relatively stagnant, with low property prices reflecting the suburb's economic difficulties, though for some Elizabeth remained an attractive option due to affordable housing. In response to the growing crisis, the South Australian government, in collaboration with federal agencies, began rolling out support programs like the Northern Economic Plan, designed to reimagine the economy of Adelaide's north. These programs emphasize transitioning the workforce into new industries such as health services, defense technology, aged care, and advanced manufacturing, although tangible results were slow to materialize. On the social front, Elizabeth remained a place of grit, pride, and strong community bonds, but it was also a suburb heavily affected by disadvantage. Public housing was widespread, and many residents faced challenges related to poverty, education, and health. Educational attainment was lower than the state average, with schools working hard to lift aspirations and create pathways for youth into further education and employment. Social services and nonprofit organizations played crucial roles, delivering food programs, job readiness workshops, and mental health support. Community spirit remained strong, however, and 2015 saw many grassroots efforts to strengthen Elizabeth's social fabric. Events such as multicultural festivals, arts programs at the Shedley Theatre, and sporting competitions at local football and soccer clubs continued to foster a sense of belonging and resilience among residents. Demographically, Elizabeth was becoming more diverse by 2015. The original population, largely composed of British migrants who arrived during the 10-pound palm era, was aging, while newer waves of migrants from African nations, the Middle East and Asia, were steadily changing the suburb's cultural landscape. This growing diversity was celebrated at times, notably through public events and local government initiatives promoting multicultural harmony, but also occasionally highlighted tensions around integration and resource competition. Programs aimed at supporting new Australians, particularly refugees, were active in Elizabeth, helping with English language skills, job placement, and social inclusion activities. The area's youth population was especially multicultural, offering both challenges and opportunities for local schools, community organizations, and service providers. Crime and public safety were ongoing concerns in Elizabeth in 2015. The suburb, had a reputation, fair or not, for higher-than-average rates of property crime, domestic violence, and substance abuse. Local police worked closely with the community to improve relationships and encourage crime prevention, while neighborhood watch programs and youth outreach projects aimed to address the underlying causes of antisocial behavior. Despite media portrayals that often focused on the negative aspects, many residents were proud of their community's resilience and the countless positive stories unfolding daily in schools, churches, clubs, and homes. Course. Here's a full, detailed, flowing paragraph about Elizabeth, Australia in 2016, designed to read over about 10 minutes. In 2016, Elizabeth, South Australia remained a suburb deeply shaped by its proud industrial past, but facing new realities as it transitioned into a post-manufacturing future. Located about 24 kilometers north of Adelaide's city centre and forming part of the city of Playford, Elizabeth was originally established in 1955 to accommodate South Australia's booming population and emerging industrial economy. By 2016, however, it was at a critical juncture. The region was still reeling from the announced closure of the Holden car manufacturing plant, a major employer since the 1950s, with the shutdown scheduled for 2017. The shadow of Holden's exit loomed large over Elizabeth that year, leading to anxiety about mass unemployment, economic decline, and the future identity of the suburb. Despite these fears, there was a growing conversation in 2016 about renewal and transformation. Government strategies like the Northern Economic Plan aimed to redirect Elizabeth's economy away from traditional manufacturing and towards emerging industries like health, defense technology, renewable energy, and education. The Playford Health Precinct continued to expand, anchored by the Lyell McEwen Hospital, bringing much-needed jobs and hinting at a possible economic pivot toward healthcare and allied industries. Socially, Elizabeth was a portrait of resilience amidst hardship. A working-class stronghold, the suburb faced notable socioeconomic challenges in 2016. Unemployment was higher than the national average, welfare dependency was common, and educational attainment rates were lower than many other parts of Adelaide. Yet the people of Elizabeth retained a powerful sense of community and pride in their suburb's character. Demographically, Elizabeth was becoming increasingly diverse. In addition to the descendants of British migrants who originally populated the area under the 10-pound palm assisted passage scheme, Elizabeth had welcomed newer waves of immigrants from Afghanistan, Sudan, and other parts of Africa and the Middle East. This created a vibrant cultural mosaic visible in local markets, festivals, and schools, even as integration challenges persisted. Programs focusing on multicultural inclusion and youth engagement gained momentum during this period, with various initiatives run by local councils, nonprofit organizations, and schools seeking to harness the energy and creativity of Elizabeth's younger generations. Crime and social disadvantage remained pressing concerns for Elizabeth in 2016. The area often found itself the subject of negative media portrayals, particularly around crime statistics involving domestic violence, drug use, and property offenses. Nevertheless, many residents and community leaders worked tirelessly to challenge these stereotypes and to address the root causes of social problems through education, mental health services, job training programs, and community building activities. The expansion of the Playford Alive Urban Renewal Project was a visible sign of government investment aimed at revitalizing the region. This project, one of the largest urban renewal efforts in South Australian history, sought to improve housing, infrastructure, and community facilities, and to attract private investment into the northern suburbs. Culturally, Elizabeth remained a beacon of creativity and pride. Its musical heritage, rooted in being the birthplace of Jimmy Barnes and the legendary Cold Chisel, continued to inspire local musicians and artists. Community events celebrating music, arts, and sports were important for fostering social cohesion. Venues like the Shedley Theatre provided spaces for local talent to flourish, while grassroots sporting clubs continued to serve as social anchors. The Central District Football Club, the Bulldogs, in the Sandful, though not as dominant as during its golden era in the early 2000s, still commanded a loyal following, symbolizing Elizabeth's gritty, competitive spirit. Soccer clubs also grew in popularity, reflecting the suburb's increasing multicultural flavor. Infrastructure improvements were another focus for Elizabeth in 2016. Upgrades to the Gawler rail line and road improvements were ongoing discussions. At the state and local government levels, with a strong push for better public transport links to support residents' access to jobs in other parts of Adelaide. Politically, Elizabeth and the broader northern suburbs became important battlegrounds in both state and federal elections. Policymakers paid close attention to the northern vote, offering promises of investment, job creation, and improved public services. The unemployment crisis sparked by Holden's closure spurred new funding announcements and transition assistance packages for affected workers, although skepticism remained high among residents as to whether these efforts would be sufficient or reach those who needed them most. Despite these challenges, 2016 was also a year when seeds of hope were being planted. There was a strong spirit of activism, a sense of urgency, and a growing number of grassroots movements determined to shape Elizabeth's future in positive ways. Residents increasingly engaged in conversations about economic diversification, community renewal, and youth empowerment. Local schools invested more heavily in STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, hoping to prepare the next generation for jobs in new industries. Meanwhile, housing developments in the Playford area hinted at population growth and a slow shift in the suburb's image. The combination of federal, state, and council initiatives, private sector interest, and community resilience positioned Elizabeth to weather the coming storm of Holden's final closure with at least a cautious optimism. While nobody underestimated the challenges ahead, many in Elizabeth began to imagine a future where the suburb could once again be a thriving, dynamic part of Adelaide's north, not by relying on old industries but by reinventing itself for a new era. Would you also like a timeline or short fact sheet about key events from Elizabeth in 2016 to go with this? It could make it even more detailed if you want. Certainly, here's a full, detailed, 10-minute paragraph-style narrative covering Elizabeth, South Australia in 2018, touching on economic, social, political, and cultural aspects. In 2018, Elizabeth, a northern suburb of Adelaide in South Australia, continued navigating the complex aftermath of industrial decline with the full impact of Holden's factory closure, finalized in late 2017, settling into the community's consciousness. This event marked the end of an era for Elizabeth, which had been founded in 1955 as a satellite city designed to support South Australia's industrial expansion, with the Holden automotive plant at its core. For over 60 years, Holden had been more than just a major employer. It was an integral part of Elizabeth's identity. By 2018, the suburb was adjusting to a new reality. Thousands of residents who had directly or indirectly relied on Holden's operations were now part of a transitioning workforce. Job losses had rippled across the region, affecting not only manufacturing workers, but also small businesses, service providers, and families. The closure also left emotional scars. Many in the community felt a deep sense of grief, not just for the jobs, but for the loss of purpose and identity that came with the end of large-scale car production in Australia. Despite the hardships, 2018 was also a year when serious efforts to reshape Elizabeth's future began to gain traction. The Northern Economic Plan, introduced a few years earlier, began delivering targeted investments intended to diversify the local economy and build resilience. One of the key focus areas was health and social services, particularly anchored around the expanding Playford Health Precinct and the Lyle McEwen Hospital. These facilities were now major employers and were being positioned as the new economic heart of the region. Other growing sectors included aged care, education, logistics, and defense-related industries, as the federal government's defense procurement projects promised to boost advanced manufacturing across Adelaide's northern corridor. In line with this, retraining programs were offered to former Holden workers and young people in the area through TAFE SA and employment agencies, focusing on upskilling in trades, healthcare, and tech-related roles. However, critics pointed out that many of the jobs available were lower paid, more casual, and lacked the long-term security that manufacturing once provided. Socially, Elizabeth in 2018 remained a suburb marked by a high level of disadvantage, but also by community strength and persistence. The unemployment rate in the city of Playford, which includes Elizabeth, remained well above the state average, particularly among young people and long-term job seekers. Public housing was still prevalent, and many residents faced challenges around financial stress, mental health, and social isolation. Yet there were numerous signs of community resilience. Nonprofits, neighborhood houses, and local councils were active in delivering programs around job readiness, mental health support, youth engagement, and food security. The Elizabeth Rise Community Center and other hubs offered spaces for connection, learning, and healing, particularly for multicultural groups and young families. Elizabeth's population was increasingly diverse, with a growing number of migrants and refugees from Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia joining the long-established British migrant community. While integration remained a challenge, there was also a flourishing of cultural exchange with festivals, school programs, and intercultural events helping to build bridges between communities. Crime and safety continued to be public concerns. Property crimes, youth crime, and drug-related incidents were still reported at higher-than-average rates compared to other parts of Adelaide, often linked to underlying issues like poverty, trauma, and intergenerational unemployment. However, in 2018, there was growing focus on prevention. Community policing, school partnerships, and restorative justice programs were expanding, aiming to redirect at-risk youth before they entered the criminal justice system. Schools in the U.S.,